So, first of all, I did not vote for him. Okay? We know who we're talking about. I just want to make sure that just because I'm American doesn't mean I voted for him, okay? I did not. If anybody works in immigration, I'd like to talk to you over lunch. Okay. It's like a lady. I love it. It's good. It's good. It's only a good joke. It's only a good joke if two times they laugh. One time, not so good. So I want to be very clear about who I am, and most specifically, what I am not. I am not a neuroscientist. I am not a traditional educator. I am not a school administrator. And I know nothing about reading remediation. For me, reading remediation is a PTSD. You know what this is? Very, very traumatic for me as a dyslexic. What I am is a 45 years of experience being dyslexic. I have 15 years experience being married to a dyslexic. I have 10 years experience being the father of a dyslexic. So I have about 100 years of experience altogether. What I am very good at is understanding the experience of being dyslexic and understanding where traditional education fails people like me. I'm not in the business of pointing fingers at what education is doing wrong. I am interested in adding tools to the educational system that will let them embrace students like me more effectively. Perfect. So, I tell you a little bit about my story because it is the background for everything that I do today. In the United States, we are in a very bad situation when it comes to teaching students with dyslexia. If you are a family or come from a family like mine, where I have the benefit of being diagnosed in 3rd grade, which is about 6 years old, I had a family with the awareness of dyslexia. My father was dyslexic. They anticipated I might be dyslexic because it's hereditary. And because we had the resources, I could get the tutoring, the private education that I needed. So I was very, very fortunate in this regard. The way we look at dyslexic education in the United States would suggest that a student like me would be an instant success. All of those: diagnosis, remediation, resources. And often in the educational system, people that work in this space say that if we could get these 3 things, we've solved the problem. I'm here to say that that isn't how it works. These are, yes, 3 very important variables in a very, very complicated equation. In that equation, something that we neglect is how a student with dyslexia perceives themselves, how they feel about themselves, their self-esteem. Going back to my story, I was able to get into a very competitive college because I had the academic fortitude. I don't know if that's not the best word. I had academic resilience to get admissions to a very difficult college. But what was happening for me that entire time, from 6 years old to 16, 17 years old, was I was seeing evidence on a daily basis of how I was broken. When I got tutoring, I was taken away from my peers, and I went to the small room without the windows, the little tiny desks, because I needed to be adjusted. I needed to be fixed so that I could perform like everybody else. In the hallways, the whispers about how I'm stupid, how I'm unable to read, how I'm an idiot. And even in the private schools, I remember being laughed at by a teacher. And so we, as students with dyslexia, can't help but to feel a deep sense of shame in who we are. There's a gentleman who worked in the 1960s. His name is Seligman. He was the one that came up with a theory called learned helplessness. For those of you that are familiar with his work, I'll just repeat it for those who aren't. He made a series of experiments with dogs in an environment where they had an electrified platform and a safe space next to this electrified platform. For the control dogs, they would stand on the platform, they would get shocked, they would jump to the safe zone. For the variable in the equation, these dogs were given a paralyzing agent, a temporary paralyzing agent. I don't know how better to say that. An injection so that they could no longer move. They experienced shock after shock after shock. Now, what happened was the paralyzing agent wears off so they can move again. But even though they can move again, they fail to jump into the safe space. They stay on the platform where they're getting shocked. And Dr. Seligman postulates, he imagines that the reason why is because the loss of a sense of control that these dogs have leads them to a psychological place where they give up. What we would call in human psychology, depression, hopelessness. What I found most interesting about his study was that Dr. Seligman realized that there was only one way to enable these dogs to manufacture the process of escaping once again. And it was for the experimenters to actually physically go into the space, pick up the dogs, and move their paws into the safe space. They picked them. They did that a couple of times so that the dogs, okay. Then they shot them again. These dogs respond by going into the safe space. So I can't help but to draw a parallel between our experience as students with dyslexia and this experiment. On a day-to-day basis, starting in the very, very beginning of our educational process, we start experiencing failure. In the United States, The ability to learn how to read is the first academic exercise. And very, very quickly, one starts to draw a parallel between their ability to read and their intelligence. And that is reinforced by everybody else around them. They get put into the slow class for the slow kids. What happens after years of this defeat on a daily basis? We believe that we have lost control, much as these dogs who are getting shocked in these cages. We do not believe that we can change our circumstances because we have tried so frequently and we have failed. During my educational process, despite being able to perform in school, which required coming home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and working to midnight every single day, including Sundays, I was able to perform on an academic level because I could control how much effort I put in. I could start to manipulate the outcomes. I could start to get the grades that I needed to stay in school and to go to a good university. But what was also happening is that beneath all that, I was still harboring what I call a malignant self-esteem. Malignant is like cancerous almost, self-esteem, eroding, perpetually eroding. And what I started to do was I started to look for ways to self-medicate, to feel normal about myself. And for me, that was alcohol and drugs. Very logical progression. I ingest something and I no longer feel different. I ingest something and I feel like I'm a member of the tribe. I'm no longer isolated. Well, we know that's not a sustainable solution. In the United States, they say, research shows that 50% of adolescents involved in juvenile justice. Juvenile justice is our criminal system. 50% have dyslexia. They also say that 60% of adolescents, teenagers involved in drug and alcohol abuse have dyslexia. And 35% of all dyslexics drop out of school. These are alarming statistics. And I understand why it is that my little dyslexic brothers and sisters choose these paths. We don't believe that we are the smart kids. So academic success, no. Maybe we are lucky enough to be good athletes, in which case, maybe we get by. But as we all know, when you come to middle school, high school, this is 12, 13 years old through 18 years old, the pressure to define yourself, to identify who you are within your peer group, is so powerful that we migrate, we move towards those groups where it's easy to gain acceptance. Drugs, alcohol, throwing bricks through windows, stealing cars, whatever it may be. This for us is, we can succeed here because the standards are very, very low. This is why we have these statistics for dyslexic students. This is the depressing part. Now we go. Joaquin, how am I doing on this? Is okay? Timing is okay? Okay. Maria, you're doing a great job. Really good job, Maria. So, I go to college and I study the philosophy of religion. Philosophia de religia. Okay. Which in the United States means you have no job opportunities. So I decided that I would do the stupidest thing I could do, and I bought this little restaurant on a tourist island called Martha's Vineyard off the coast of Massachusetts where I live. And when I say the stupidest idea, I could not have made a cup of coffee before I bought this restaurant. I poured my heart and my soul into this restaurant for 5 years. And at the end of 5 years, I sold it for twice what I bought it for. The only reason that I was able to do well in the restaurant business, and by well, I mean that 60% of people who actually know what they're doing fail in the restaurant business in the first 3 years. I was 23, I didn't know what I was doing, yet I succeeded. Why? The only reason I succeeded was because I was dyslexic. The only reason. I'll show you why in a second. It turns out that statistically in the United States, in the UK, 35% of all entrepreneurs have dyslexia. And they say that 40% of self-made millionaires have dyslexia. I wasn't part of that statistic, unfortunately, but there's still hope. What I realized was that there was this correlation, there was this relationship between my success as an entrepreneur and my dyslexia, which was interesting to me, but it wasn't relevant until I fell in love with a dyslexic woman. We got married, and we had a purebred dyslexic. What's the term for Spanish, a purebred? I don't know if that translates. When you take two racehorses of the highest quality and you make a little baby racehorse of the highest quality, two dyslexics make a great little dyslexic. This is purebred, meaning 100%. And I looked at this little baby and I thought to myself, I know what's going to happen when he goes to school. No matter how much love and affection and support we give him, he will wind up thinking that he is stupid and broken because he is dyslexic. That prospect, that idea, was not okay with me. And so a couple of things had happened that led me to start my organization, NoticeAbility. I don't think it's going to translate, but the name of the organization is Notice, to observe, notice, ability, one's capacity, one's talents. Notice ability. But when you say it in English, you also hear no disability, which means no obstacles, right? Notice ability, if you see what I do well, you do not see what I don't do well. The way it's said in English, same thing, different words, sounds the same to the ear. Noticeability. I had been given a book called The Dyslexic Advantage. I don't know if it's in Spanish yet, but I hope it is. The Dyslexic Advantage is written by a pair of neuroscientists who have interviewed and looked at the brains of thousands of dyslexics. And what they have concluded is that there are a set of cognitive abilities that accompany our brain construction. So we know from this morning that my brain is built differently, the wiring works differently than a non-dyslexic. With that different wiring comes a difficulty with reading, but now we know comes with exceptional abilities. I also saw that one of the greatest sources of pride for me, one of the things that started to build my self-esteem, was the fact that I was able to be successful in a very difficult industry. An industry, restaurateur, entrepreneurship, where I was able to exercise some of these cognitive advantages and see how powerful they really were. The last thing that contributed to my thinking was a conference like this, and one of the head, the principal, whatever you call it here, the head of the school of dyslexics only, brought out a student in front of an audience like this, and this student was maybe 12 years old, kind of long hair, kind of shy, and he came out and he described to a room of educators, he pulled out this enormous basketball shoe. And on the back of this basketball shoe was some metal pieces and some screws and a long cord leading out of it. And he described how this was a prototype, an example of a business he wanted to build that enabled him to charge his cell phone while he walked. There were some mechanical issues, of course, but more importantly, after he made his presentation, all these educators in the room were just applauding. How did you come up with this? Wow, all these affirmation, positive things that they were saying to him about the way he was thinking. And I saw this child like this. And I knew at that moment that that boy was not going to go off to the path of drug and alcohol abuse. He was not going to get involved in criminal behavior because he had been exposed to something that he was so good at that he now had a reason to get through school, to pursue this dream. It turns out that this is not a rare occasion among successful dyslexics. In this book, The Dyslexic Advantage, they have something they call the 700 Club, 700 Club. These are global entrepreneurs. These are Fortune 500 CEOs, big business CEOs, all of whom have dyslexia, and all who scored 700 or less on their SATs. SATs in the United States are standardized testing that is required for university. The top score is 1600. All of these dyslexics had 700 or less. You get 500 for writing your name. And the authors ask these CEOs and these entrepreneurs, how could you become who you are after experiencing such academic defeat? And every single one of the 700 Club members could tell you the exact time and place where a teacher, a parent, a coach, a friend stopped just for a minute and said, "Oh, Joaquin, you're pretty good at that." That was it. "Joaquin, I didn't know you. It's good." That's it. Those episodes in their lives changed the course of their entire existence. Just that one little mention. And the reason why is because we as dyslexics who have been experiencing this defeat that, like those dogs on the platform, have become helpless and hopeless. And we get that little dose, "How do you got that?" This is enough for us to and change the course of our lives. So I thought to myself, how do we create an opportunity to take the cognitive advantages of dyslexia, the professions that we know dyslexics are disproportionately successful in, that are much more successful than everybody else, disproportionate. And then how do we use those two principles to teach these students what's called social emotional learning? Big thing in the United States right now. Social emotional learning includes self-esteem, how to negotiate problems, how to communicate with other people, how to understand what benefits you bring to a circumstance or a group. This is social emotional learning. Research has shown that those students with high social emotional learning do better in health, academically, they stay in school longer, they perform better, they go to better colleges, they make more money, they make better husbands or wives. Every category, increase in social emotional learning translates to a more successful human being. So when I was talking about that equation, very, very beginning, I said reading remediation, early detection, the support that the student needs. These things, without social emotional learning, do not equal an empowered person. You've just simply got a person with low self-esteem who can read. This is not an empowered person. Also, somebody who feels very good about themselves but can't read, this is not an empowered person either. We need dyslexics who can read, who feel good about themselves, equals empowered person. So I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is basically Boston, Massachusetts, way up in the northeast corner. And this is where we have Harvard University, where we have Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, #1 engineering school in the country. And by the way, they call dyslexia the MIT disease. So many dyslexics at MIT, okay? And I told professors at Harvard and MIT what I wanted to build. I wanted to build professional development training, which is, teacher training, right? There's a lot of you are teachers, right? Teach them about what is dyslexia, understand how the current paradigm, the current view of dyslexia is having a negative impact on the development of the dyslexic child, and juxtapose or to contrast, to compare and contrast what a student with dyslexia who is exposed to their strengths, how that affects their academic performance. Then leave teachers with enrichment curriculum. Enrichment curriculum is a class which is not focused on math, science, reading, no. Enrichment, additional material so that they can, I almost said enjoy their learning. Yeah, I guess enjoy their learning. They can engage in something that they find stimulating. This is enrichment curriculum. So that we don't have to send a bunch of educators back to the classroom and ask them to figure out a way to apply what we have just told them in their classroom. For the teachers in the room, you have no time for that. You have lots of students, parents, administrators. We wanted to provide you with enrichment curriculum that is perfectly tailored for dyslexic students so that you can go to the classroom the next day and engage those students in the enrichment curriculum we've created so that you can continue to learn about this strength paradigm, this strength mindset, while your students are getting the social emotional learning they need, the self-esteem that they desperately need. And so then I had to ask myself how we were going to do that. Harvard and MIT agreed that what I was doing was very valuable. Well, they thought it was, how do I say, it was worth the risk. Let's put it that way. So I had all these professors at these universities helping me. Then I needed to figure out how we were going to deliver this curriculum. So what we decided to do was build a series of enrichment curriculum that would focus on the 4 top professions that dyslexics succeed in. For guys like Joaquin, entrepreneurship. For people like my wife, art. For people at MIT, engineering. For Gaudi, architecture. These are all dyslexics, and these are the field that we do better in than everybody else. I'll explain why in a second. Creating courses that focus on these subjects naturally are going to engage the dyslexic student because like the 700 Club, they are learning for the first time in their life what they are good at, not just what they're bad at. And then to teach them the content of entrepreneurship, why not use an online medium, an online teaching tool, so that we can use video, audio, graphic or pictorial imagery. And then, instead of just simply teaching about, in our entrepreneurship, stakeholder management, who is your client, who are the people that can affect your business, positive or negative. This is one module. We don't talk about, we talk about this subject by using social emotional learning. For example, in order to decide who your customer is going to be, you have to imagine how they see your product. You have to take your perspective and understand theirs. This is called empathy, right? But this is empathy under the context of entrepreneurship. Or if you're trying to decide who your stakeholder is, kids have to go out and they need to talk to people. Not talk to 45-year-old white men, because then your market is this big. But to speak to the grandmother, speak to the bus driver, this is diversity. Understanding what our communities look like in terms of diversity and being able to speak and understand perspective. This is all social emotional learning. But the students are thinking, no, this is how I'm going to sell my new product. I got to go talk to all these people, right? They're engaged. Well, how did they show up? They go, hey, Joaquin, I got a business. Will you tell me, would you buy this thing? No, did they say, hey, Joaquin, I got an idea for you, right? How do you use your body? How do you articulate yourself in a way that engages people? This is social emotional learning. So what the students are getting is they're eating, they're eating a brownie, right? They're eating a cookie, but it has the medicine in the cookie. Social emotional learning, but they're thinking entrepreneurship, art, engineering, architecture, whatever it is. But what they're getting is what we desperately need to get into their minds so they can balance I'm stupid, I'm useless, I'm never going to be anything. They can start to say, well, I might just be an entrepreneur. I might just be an architect. That allows them to be more balanced in who they perceive themselves to be. And when you feel good about yourself, trust me, drugs and alcohol are less desirable. Criminal behavior, less appealing. So I'm going to show you a video, an example of one of the videos that we use that describe the cognitive advantages of dyslexia. And I get very embarrassed when I listen to myself on a video, so I might go to the bathroom or something, but interconnected reasoning. Interconnected, even in space. Your eye interconnected to remind you of a big concept. And then as I describe that concept, I'm using visual tools with the eye so that the student goes, oh wait, eye was that ability to look at the taxi driver. Oh, got it. Okay, I remember. Just different ways of getting through. And then I'll explain what happens in the classroom. So Mario, who's up in the, thank you. We're going to play, if you would, that one video of me. If it's possible to blow it up to the full screen, that's great. I think it takes about 7 minutes. I'll be back. It's a good look. We can play it too if you want. Yeah. I need to play it. Got it. Okay. Got it. See, like, we don't even need to speak the same language. I get it all. We've got games that do, okay.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that first video. Now this video has got some real substance to it. There's a lot of material I'm going to throw at you. But you can always pause and rewind and fast forward, so take it at your own pace. What I'm going to be speaking to you about are the strengths of dyslexia. We have put it into a very easy acronym, which is basically taking the first letter of a bunch of words and creating a new word. It's called MIND, M-I-N-D. That's easy to remember. Each one stands for a different strength that dyslexics have. M, material reasoning. I, interconnected reasoning. N, narrative reasoning. D, dynamic reasoning. Don't worry, I'm going to explain all that in a second. The one thing to remember is that you've got two things that you can download from this session that can essentially notes and a worksheet, okay? One is called the Mind Strength Review handout, and the other one is the Mind Worksheet, okay? You'll find both of those in this lesson, and you can print those out and use them as a reference. You can go back and read them, okay? Now what I'm talking about, that M-I-N-D, those mind strengths, comes from a book called The Dyslexic Advantage. Definitely get your parents to read this or listen to it yourself. What they describe are these four characteristics that we have that we do better than almost everybody else in the world. Now the first one is called material reasoning. Have you ever seen a blueprint, which is a drawing of a building, but it's on a piece of paper? And have you looked at it, and all of a sudden in your mind, you can actually see what that building is going to look like? Almost like as if you're in a game of Minecraft. You've already built up that blueprint, and all of a sudden you can see the house. And if I said, okay, now go to the back door, go through the kitchen, go up the stairs, and turn left, what room is there? And you're like, well, it's the bathroom. That ability is something dyslexics have. Other people can do it, they can do it okay, but you do it in an incredibly different way than most. The next one is I, interconnected reasoning. We, as dyslexics, have an incredible way of looking at these pieces of information that don't seem to have any relationship. And we kind of go, wait a minute, and an idea pops out. I'll give you an example. Imagine this woman is standing in the rain on the corner of a street in downtown Boston or New York, and she's waiting for a cab, and there's no cab coming, and she's freezing. Well, right up above her in an apartment building is a guy who doesn't have a job, he's got a car, and he's thinking, man, how can I earn some money? They've each got a cell phone. And we as dyslexics say, wait a minute, what if we made it so that they could communicate and he could get in his car and give it a ride, and what do you get? Uber. This is how we think. Most people say, oh, I don't know, he's just going to not have a job and she's going to get wet. No. We can see these ways of bringing together these different ingredients and creating a new idea that other people haven't considered. Narrative reasoning, M-I-N-D, narrative reasoning. Narrative reasoning is our ability to tell a story, to remember things in our life with like such detail that it's like we're reliving them as we speak. How many of you wanted your parents to get you a new bike, okay? Now you didn't just go up and say, hey, Dad, I need a bike. You said, Dad, imagine this. If I had a bike, you wouldn't have to drive me to baseball practice. I could just get on that bike and you can stay home, drink your cup of coffee, and read the newspaper. What's the difference between, hey, I want a bike, and what I just explained? We're telling a story. one of the things that dyslexics do is we have the ability to tell stories, maybe through writing stories or speaking, but we have ways to make our ideas really compelling. Compelling is another word for like getting people to really get excited about what we're talking about. I bet you're thinking right now of things where you've told pretty good stories, right? The last one is dynamic reasoning. Okay, this one's a little bit harder to understand. We have, as dyslexics, the ability to identify things that have happened in the past, understand them, and then almost predict the future. I'll give you an example. We've learned probably about erosion at some point in school, right? Rain drops onto a mountain, all that rain comes together and it slowly carves a path which turns into a river which finds its way to the ocean, right? We weren't there to watch that whole process happen, but we understand, okay, I see all this rain came together, carved this through rock, and then this creates a river. Now, because we understand that, we're then able to almost fast forward that process into the distant future. Okay, well, what if more rain comes down and carves a bigger path, and this river grows, and this river turns into a lake, and oh my gosh, this river that I'm looking at right now will one day be an ocean. Now you think to yourself, well, can't everybody do that? Yeah, they can do that to a certain degree. But dyslexics have the ability to identify things that have happened, even if they weren't there to witness it, and then create a prediction for what's going to happen in the future. I don't want to say it's like fortune telling, but it's kind of like seeing the future based on the past. Now I want to end this. There's a lot of material. I want to end this with one very important thing to consider. You may be sitting there going, I don't think I have any of these. Like, I'm definitely dyslexic, but I can't do any of those. I have been developing those MIND strengths that I have my entire life. You are in the process of identifying what those strengths are. And if you don't see them now, that's okay. During this course, we're going to be touching upon these different MIND strengths. And I think you're going to start to go, oh, wait a minute. I remember what he was talking about. I'm starting to see an idea emerge that nobody else was seeing. Just like working out a muscle. Right now, your muscles may not be developed. Your MIND strength, those muscles, may not be developed. Doesn't mean they're not there. My job is to help expose you to those, just like you go into the gym. Or it's like when Yoda gives Luke the lightsaber for the first time. He can't do anything, right? This is learning how to use your lightsaber, okay? So take it nice and easy. Rewind if you need to. Definitely use that worksheet. Do we have this back? Yeah. So that's an example of how we're using those multiple modalities to convey learning to the students. And what happens after this is that there is an in-person class period. So each student has access to this online learning platform, and there's all sorts of, here, gotta slow down. They have access to this online classroom where they see these videos. They have questions that they can answer to reinforce the lesson. And they have notes, because those of you who teach dyslexics understand that we have difficulty with our fine motor skills. And so as a teacher is teaching and we're writing notes, by the time we finish one sentence, the teacher's well past that. So we've created notes for them to print off so that they don't have to worry about taking notes. The last thing is that there's a section on the bottom where if they want to learn more about something that was mentioned in the video, we don't provide a bibliography,
These are dyslexics, right? They're not going to read more about it. We provide them with links to videos that they can watch on YouTube or whatever. The learning is happening, it's just not happening in the traditional way. Before I go on, I'm just going to show you, we've had a variety of stakeholders come forward, and we're about 4 years old, and we're being used now in 13 states in America and 11 countries internationally. And that is in part due to some international partners that came to us and said, I'm in Holland, my kids don't speak English, but we like what you're doing, can we translate it? So I'll just show you, if we may, that second video, if you don't mind, Mario. Oh, that's probably me. Are you going to cue that up, or do I have to do that? They'll do it? Okay. That's not that big a deal. It's just kind of funny to listen to people in Holland speak. Not important. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Maybe we'll just cue up that fourth video for the very end. Is that okay? Anyway, the point is that now all of our content, all of our videos are translated by a Dutch speaker and a Portuguese speaker. So we've got our partner in Brazil and our partner in Holland that are then pushing into those markets, delivering the same thing that we've created. We have partners in Switzerland who are doing Swiss German. Somebody in Greece wants to translate into Greece. And somebody in Macedonia, which I don't really know where it is, but they want to translate everything into Macedonian. That's such an American thing to say. I don't even know where Macedonia is. So the second part of our class is focused on what we call experiential learning. Students learn by doing, and we've got to wrap up in about 15 or 20 minutes, but I'm dyslexic, so I get some extra time. We know that dyslexics in particular tend to understand when they actually are physically doing something that reflects the content. This goes back to a man named Piaget, who was working in the 1960s at MIT. Not a very revolutionary idea, but in America, it's only now making its way into the classroom. So the teacher, right, they've gone to our teacher training. Now we give them access to this content with all the materials, the lesson plans that they as teachers need on how to facilitate the classroom. We don't go into the classroom, they do it. And we start off with a mindfulness exercise. So this is also a big thing in the United States right now. The working memory, I'm not going to get into the neuroscience, but the working memory in dyslexics tends to be diminished, smaller, less than the general population. Mindfulness is a great way to clean off the working memory, to forget for the students what was happening in the classroom before they came in, and prepare them for what we're going to do. The second thing we do is a positive affirmation exercise. This is not on week one. We transition slowly into this. And we say, quite simply, my name is Dean, I am dyslexic, and I'm a great problem solver. My name is Joaquin, I'm dyslexic, and I have outstanding interconnected reasoning skills, which you do. Off the charts. If you ever want to really see what dyslexic ingenuity, buy Joaquin lunch. He will demonstrate narrative reasoning, interconnected, and dynamic reasoning all for every second of the lunch. I promise you. It's a wild ride. Strap on your seatbelt. What we're trying to do by having students articulate that they are dyslexic and attach it to a positive adjective, a positive description of themselves, is that we're trying to carve a new neural pathway associated with the term dyslexia. Because for most of them, yeah, I'm dyslexic. We want them to say, yeah, I'm dyslexic, right? You've got to start with actually attaching a new meaning to the word. Then what happens is the students get broken up into 3 student groups, so 3-person groups. We call these, don't worry about this, Maria, soul centers, S-O-U-L. In English, that stands for self-organized, unbridled, S-O-U-L, so self-organized, unbridled learning center. Research indicates that students tend to absorb and retain content at higher rates if they believe they are learning autonomously, if they are learning independently. So the Soul Center is set up for these 3 little dyslexics to get together. They have autonomy, meaning they can speak, they can sit on tables, on desks, whatever, they can walk around as some of us like to do. And they have a force field, a cloak, a barrier from the teacher so that they can be independent. However, if they do not use the 3 things we've taught them, conflict resolution, active listening, and negotiation, they lose their independence. So if I'm in Joaquin's group and I'm saying, oh, Joaquin, that's great, I have autonomy. If I turn to Joaquin and I say, it's a stupid idea, boom, they lose that autonomy, everyone gets back in the desks. This is what the dyslexic fears most. So we say, you can have independence, you can talk to Joaquin, just have to say, hey, Joaquin, I hear your idea, I'd like to use another one, is that cool? Can we try another one? What's that? That's negotiation, right? I'm actively listening, right? These are the social emotional tools that we want these students to learn. So by giving them autonomy or threatening to take it away, they very quickly start to use these tools because they appreciate being able to be heard to their peer group. And in these soul centers, the students work for 10 weeks. 2 hours per week, one for the online learning, the other for the Soul Center. And in the entrepreneurship class, they start to identify problems as opportunities in disguise, come up with a unique business idea, and then build a business plan to support that business idea. Ultimately, at the end, they make a presentation like this, and they stand up in front of an audience, they describe their business idea, and just like that little 8th grader, yeah, we're dyslexics, that's why we came up with this. They've changed the entire way that they perceive their dyslexia. What we have done, working with educators, is we have created that opportunity to pick that dog up who's got that learned helplessness and show him how to move his legs back so that he can escape. We've taken the student who is beaten down, who is not engaged in school anymore, and we're showing them where their strengths are so that they can get re-engaged in the educational process. So like I said, our entrepreneurship course is being used in various countries and across the United States. We've just released our art curriculum. We're working right now with Harvard and MIT on our engineering/architecture. We're combining these two. And the metrics, the data, the research that we're showing is that students are experiencing a significant increase in self-esteem, what we call academic tenacity, meaning the willingness to keep working in school, even when it gets difficult. And the last metric is called stigma consciousness. How aware is the student of their belief system surrounding their disability and others? How aware are they to how much they're buying into a preconceived notion, and have they changed that? I want to pause for questions, and then I'm going to just show you a video just to, because I get to swear in it, and because, sorry, what do you say, swear? I get to say bad language in it, which a dyslexic always wants to do in full of a room full of teachers. And then we'll close out and go to lunch. And I can't believe lunch is 2 o'clock in this country. It's crazy. Does anybody have any questions about any of this? Unless I clarified everything perfectly, I doubt that.
Podéis preguntar en castellano que traducirán la respuesta para que estén tranquilos, o sea, libremente.
See, as far as she could have just said, his fly is unzipped, and I wouldn't have known the difference. Yes, ma'am. Do you speak English? Okay, thank you.
You've mentioned about the...
Espera, que te van a escuchar.
It's not about the method itself, but you mentioned that kids that they have been with alcohol and drugs abuse because they have been dyslexic. So what was the point that you realized, well, I'm doing this because I'm dyslexic, but it wasn't too late to go back to a entrepreneur stage so you could, move on?
So thank you for speaking English. I appreciate that. I'm sorry I don't speak Spanish, but thank you for that. If I understand correctly, your question is, when was it that I realized the advantages associated with dyslexia? And how was it,
How, basically how.
How? Okay. So the first real exposure I got to the dyslexic advantage was at my university. We call it a college, small university. And this is a very progressive institution, and it's very, very challenging to get into. And so if you get into this school, you know that you're going to school with very smart people. At this school, whenever you are in a course, and the professor asks a question, it's the student with the most unique perspective that gets the most attention. So for me to be in an environment surrounded by very intelligent people and to hear both professors and students paying attention to my perspective was my first glimmer, my first exposure to the fact that my perspective may be valuable. There may be something that others don't know in this situation. Very soon after that, going into the restaurant business and being able to identify the needs of my customers before they knew that they had those needs, I very quickly recognized that to be an advantage. Being able to understand the different emotional investment of the people that came through my restaurant. Did they want to be able to say hi to the owner? Did they want a really good plate of food? Do they want to have a place where they're recognized when they walk through the door? These all of a sudden became very clear to me, and I could implement them, which is the only reason I was successful, because I'm a terrible cook. So this was something that showed me that how I was perceiving reality was different, and because the money in the drawer at the end of the day was growing, this was, it doesn't grow unless you're doing something right? So these started, but then probably, I think it was released like 5 years ago, and it was the only book I've read since college, right? And so I read this book, and it reinforced through science everything I had observed in my life. And that's what I took to say we can create courses which isn't like, oh, Joaquin, you're such a smart little boy. It's not nonsense. It's, hey, look, do this exercise. I know you'll be good at it because the neuroscience proves that you'll be good at it. Then you're going to have your 700 club moment. Yes, ma'am. Thanks for letting me use you an example, Joaquin. Joaquin's like, it was confidential. I was dyslexic dean. Nobody wanted to.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I didn't understand very clearly what was the relationship with mindfulness and working memory. Could you explain that again?
Yes,
Thank you.
with what in working memory?
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness, right, okay. So working memory is where if you took the numbers uno, dos, tres and said put the tres before the uno, what's the new number? That happens in your working memory. It's like a tool bench for the brain. Everything comes into the tool bench, and then from there, it goes into short-term or long-term memory. This tool bench, like the internet bandwidth at your house, it can only take so much. It's the limitation of the working memory. So if the dyslexic student, for example, is trying to read Barcelona, forget it. They're not going to even know we're talking about a city because they're spending all their working memory decoding. One of the things that allows us, and not only is working memory finite among everybody, there's a little bit of neuroplasticity, a little bit of change that you can do, but basically the data shows that dyslexics have less working memory than the general population. So we know that that space in the brain is very, very precious. Now, if a student is coming in from the hallway where somebody was just saying like, oh, you're going to an entrepreneurship class? You can't even read, man. Their mind, their working memory is consumed. Oh, am I going to get into it? What's going to happen after? What? I can't believe you said that. How do I feel? All these things. Mindfulness, as we know, right, silences that. Deliberately tries to wipe that clean so that the workbench has available space. And the way our mindfulness is in the entrepreneurship is that every mindfulness exercise is correlated to the subject of that particular module. So if we go back to that example of the client or the stakeholder, the mindfulness session is compassion and empathy. So it reinforces what the exercise is then teaching. So we've gotten a lot of reports that students use that with their younger siblings when they go home. Just calm down, little brother. Hey, that's great. That's a practical application of what they're learning in school. Yeah. So who's standing in the way of us in lunch? Any more questions? No. No? All right. So let me just close out with this one last clip. I showed this. Is this okay to show, Joaquin? This is a documentary that I'm loosely associated with in the United States that we're working on, and the reason I'm playing it is because I want to show you that the dialogue around dyslexia, while it's still very new in a lot of the educational system, there are many of us that are working to introduce this strength-based conversation around dyslexia as we're focusing on the reading remediation needs. I've got to do it. You got it. Thanks, Mario. That was my problem. All right. All right, is that good? Oh, okay. I don't know if I'll get full screen, but
tell me about school.
I remember being in that 6 or 7 year old bracket where we're introduced to this concept of letters and this notion of reading, and I remember thinking to myself, Dean, you're such an idiot.
Reading is an artificial technology designed to record human speech and transcribe it in a convenient way.
The moment all of a sudden that you introduce printed word, you are taking knowledge and then hiding it behind a veil of obscurity, so that our ingenuity now is focused on literally decoding, dissecting this mirage in front of us to then get behind and see what the actual learning is.
The invention of reading was so important, some people's brains just didn't match up with that invention, and they kind of lost out. And 100 years ago, that was disaster. There was no way for you to do anything but menial work.
Okay, fast forward to the 21st century.
High-level thinking brings us back to the visual spatial, the sort of hands-on 3D thinking, but you're using computer graphics, compressing lots and lots of information to a visual message, which you can use to understand a tornado or the movement of the climate and ocean currents. And the people who had the trouble learning to read are the ones who are really best at this new technology.
There's some emerging research that's showing people with dyslexia may process pictures and other things in different ways from typical readers. And it's a big debate.
So is dyslexia a gift or a curse?
To be honest with you, I think it's an absolutely bullshit question. Successful dyslexics that I know attribute their success to the tenacity they had to cultivate in order to overcome their reading challenges. How on God's green earth could that be a curse if the moxie, the grit, the perseverance that you cultivated in that learning process now stands to be one of the things that distinguishes you from your peers? You would have to pry it from my dead fingers to take my dyslexia away from me.
So hopefully this is the new dialogue that emerges as we're focused on what students with dyslexia need in the classroom. And if you can combine these two things, then you can hopefully reduce the amount of time that students like me wasted using drugs and alcohol, or wasted by being involved in criminal justice. And fast forward the epiphany, the realization that their minds are tremendously powerful, and that in this day and age, in 2018, the jobs that we are best at cannot be outsourced or codified. You cannot put entrepreneurship into a computer program. You can't ask to import art from another country. These are professions that are local, that are highly skilled, highly productive, and quite frankly, the future of our economies. So on that note, Project Difference is accelerating the timeline that we're all working on here in Spain. And for you educators in the room, I just applaud you for being a part of this conference, because this is where the future lies, is unlocking the potential of this enormous population. So, on behalf of my organization, on behalf of me, on behalf of my son, thank you for doing this work. And most specifically, thank you, Maria and Mario. Thank you.